In 1910, a group of investors, led by a man named Edward A. McDougall, began purchasing land in what was then called Trains Meadows, with an eye towards building a new community targeted to middle class Manhattanites.
And what they started to do, which was what most other developers did, was to simply put in the grid and then sell lots.
Daniel Karatzas is the author of Jackson Heights, A Garden in the City, a deep historical dive into the neighborhood. While researching the book, he discovered that the Queensboro Corporation made a drastic change to their plans for the 350 acres. The investors took a trip to a few European cities, and what they saw altered their plans entirely.
So they changed their focus of development from small scale things to larger developments.
What they saw in Europe was the garden apartment, large apartment buildings that ran a block long and surrounded a garden interior with trees, flowers, and benches. Green space was not just confined to the interior, parks and other open spaces were built nearby.
They coined the term garden apartment for the development that we now know as the Greystones, where they set aside land both in front and back of the building for the shared use of the residents, and the apartments themselves went front to back. The buildings were only one apartment deep.
This change in plans has defined the look and feel of Jackson Heights ever since the Queensboro Corporation started erecting apartment buildings.
Jackson Heights was built denser from the start. Garden apartments were 4 to 6 stories, the private homes sort of less dense. The focus was on the apartment rather than the house for many years.
Though it's now known as one of the most ethnically diverse neighborhoods in the world, Jackson Heights was originally an exclusive domain.
It was obvious when you read the Jackson Heights News that the prices that they were charging for the apartments and the houses were outside the reach of most recent immigrants, people of color.
That was accelerated when the concept of cooperative apartments encouraged the vetting of buyers.
It also would allow them to create a homogeneous, restricted community because by selling co-ops and board approval, they could then create a sort of country club, suburban-like community in the midst of New York City with its own golf course and tennis club and clubhouse and clubs and all of that. And it all worked.
But after the Great Depression, the Queensboro Corporation needed money and buyers, and so they expanded their marketing to a wider group of people. They built their last building in 1949, but the impact of their efforts was so significant, a large section of Jackson Heights was made a New York City historic district in 1999.
To me, what the success of the Queensboro Corporation was is the quality of the housing stock. And a very non-technical term is that it's been a relatively pleasant place to live in terms of the scale and the fact that the buildings do blend in with one another. In a city that's a big mishmash of stuff coming at you, it's nice to come home to something that's relatively pleasant and human scaled. That's what we have here. That the type of housing really works for a city like New York and continues to work for a city like New York. Unfortunately, it's uneconomic to build this way any longer. And so that's why we should be happy with what we have here, Sunnyside Gardens, Forest Hills Gardens, sort of Brownstone, Brooklyn, and other neighborhoods that have become historic districts, because otherwise, if you allow it to be the free-for-all for the developers, it's going to become a city that nobody wants to live in.
For Diverse City, I'm Craig Thompson.